His family threw him out as a child, but on the day the will was read, they learned he owned everything. The grand marble hall of the Thorne estate resonated with the booming voice of Attorney Davies, each word echoing in the greedy ears of the Thorne family. A tense, almost suffocating anticipation hung in the air, thick enough to be cut with a knife. Thaddeus Thorne, a man whose silk suit seemed to cling to his impatience, incessantly jiggled a knee beneath the polished mahogany table. Beside him, his beautiful yet utterly vacuous wife, Serafina, absently twirled an exorbitantly priced diamond earring between her fingers, her gaze flitting around the opulent room as if searching for a more entertaining distraction. In a distant corner, Reginald Thorne, a cousin twice removed who managed the family's dwindling real estate ventures, stood with a sneer etched onto his face, radiating the smug arrogance of a man certain he was about to become the estate's rightful master. All three were convinced they were the most deserving recipients of the lion's share of the colossal inheritance left by their recently deceased, immensely wealthy relative. Tucked away on the frayed edge of an ancient sofa, almost like a shadow, sat Arthur Finch, a figure in wrinkled, threadbare clothing, his face a roadmap of lines etched by years of hardship and neglect. To the Thornes, Arthur was nothing more than a forgotten, pathetic distant relative, a burden who had arrived seeking refuge within their grand walls, an unwelcome intrusion into their world of pristine luxury. Thaddeus, his brow furrowed in distaste, cast a fleeting glance at the old man, as if Arthur's mere presence somehow sullied the sophisticated ambience of the salon. "Mr. Davies, can we expedite this matter?" Thaddeus grumbled, his voice laced with thinly veiled annoyance. "Arthur's presence here is quite dreary enough. Let us learn of my dear uncle's final wishes and put an end to this farce." Serafina giggled, covering her mouth delicately with a manicured hand, a false display of politeness. "One hopes he isn't mentioned in the will at all. It would be an absolute embarrassment for the family." Reginald offered a silent, cold chuckle, a calculating glint in his eyes. For them, Arthur Finch was simply an unfortunate accident, a minor inconvenience standing between them and their perceived fortune. Attorney Davies looked at them over the rim of his thick spectacles, a faint, almost imperceptible glint of mischief dancing in his eyes. He then opened a thick, leather-bound file, its pages rustling softly in the quiet room. "You are quite right, Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice surprisingly calm, almost too calm. "There are indeed some final wishes. However, I must caution you that things are not entirely as they appear. This is not merely the reading of a will." Arthur Finch shifted slightly on the sofa, a subtle movement that went unnoticed by the Thornes, whose attention was solely fixed on the lawyer. His long, gnarled fingers slipped into the worn pocket of his jacket, finding the familiar, cold metallic feel of the small device within. In the depths of his eyes, a distant yet remarkably sharp intelligence flickered, a knowing spark that belied his ragged exterior. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his lips. His whisper, barely audible in the grand room, carried a powerful, resonant echo in his own mind. "Yes, the game has ended." Thaddeus, misinterpreting the faint sound as a mere mumble, frowned, his impatience growing. "What did you say, Arthur? Are you talking to yourself? Please, we are already quite on edge." Serafina rolled her eyes, her disdain for the old man now openly displayed, as if she could no longer tolerate his presence. Reginald, with a mocking smirk, murmured, "Perhaps he's finally lost his faculties." Knew he would. A quiet satisfaction settled within Augustus, the architect of this elaborate charade. He knew, with an almost divine certainty, that Thaddeus and Serafina were utterly oblivious to the irony that enveloped them, completely unaware of the impending catastrophe about to descend upon their lives. The man they believed to be the poor, pitiful Arthur Finch was, in fact, the mastermind of an empire, and they were on the cusp of experiencing the greatest shock of their lives. The fate of everyone in the room was sealed within that stack of papers in Attorney Davies's hand, and those papers would begin with a name the Thorne family never, ever expected. Augustus Finch, a self-made billionaire at 78, had etched his name into history as the founder of a global investment giant, Finch Global Investments. Yet, this towering success story had its roots in a profound betrayal experienced in childhood. The genesis of his wealth was not simply ambition, but a deep, festering wound that never truly healed. It began on a bitterly cold winter night when Augustus, a mere 10-year-old boy, was callously cast out by his father's family, the Thornes. At that time, the Thorne family were minor landowners, far from the vast fortune they now coveted, but they harbored an insatiable pride in their lineage, a pride that made them view young Augustus's birth as a blemish on their family name, particularly due to his mother's perceived lower social status. One frigid morning, his uncle, a man whose face was twisted with cold disdain, had led the small boy out of the family home. With nothing but a small, worn wooden trunk containing a few meager possessions and a handful of coins, Augustus was taken to the outskirts of the town, given a harsh warning never to return. The wound in his heart, inflicted on that desolate day, never truly mended. It merely scabbed over, remaining a constant, throbbing ache beneath the surface, a bitter reminder of their cruelty. From that moment on, Augustus stood alone against the world. He battled hunger, the biting cold, and the crushing weight of loneliness, yet he was sustained by an unyielding fire of vengeance and an overwhelming desire to prove himself. The sting of their rejection fueled a burning resolve. In the simple jobs he began at a remarkably young age, he quickly discovered a natural shrewdness, a keen intellect, and an extraordinary financial intuition. He started in a small general store, learning the value of every penny, the subtle art of negotiation. Then, he became an apprentice at a local bank, an opportunity he seized with both hands. Every night, long after the bank closed, he devoured books on economics, poring over ledgers, devouring financial reports, learning the intricate nuances of markets and the subtle art of speculation. He understood that knowledge was power, and he absorbed it like a sponge. With time, he meticulously invested his meager savings, calculated risks with uncanny precision, and capitalized on every single opportunity that arose. He swiftly gained a reputation as a banking prodigy, a young man with an unparalleled grasp of finance, and by his early 30s, he had founded his own investment firm, Finch Global Investments. The company grew at an astonishing pace, transcending national borders, and transforming Augustus into one of the wealthiest men in the world, a titan of industry. Yet, wealth, for all its power and prestige, had failed to fill the gaping void in Augustus's soul. He had learned the dark, cynical truth of human nature far too well. His immense fortune attracted a legion of sycophants, opportunists, and false friends, each clamoring for a piece of his pie, each offering feigned loyalty in exchange for financial gain. He understood that everyone wanted something from him, that genuine affection or respect was a rare, almost mythical commodity. He never forgot the Thorne family. Their contempt, their brutal dismissal of him, had remained a potent source of ambition and simmering resentment throughout the years. The emotional scar remained, a raw, unforgiven betrayal. Now, the Thornes themselves, victims of their own imprudent investments and gross mismanagement, had squandered their ancestral wealth, yet they clung desperately to an illusion of grandeur, striving to appear rich from the outside, their arrogance undimmed by their financial ruin. Their hypocrisy and insatiable greed only fueled the long-standing anger Augustus had harbored. As the years advanced, Augustus's health began to deteriorate, a slow, inevitable decline that brought the question of his colossal inheritance to the forefront. Augustus was adamant. He did not want his hard-earned fortune to fall into undeserving hands. He yearned for his wealth to be inherited by someone who truly understood life's profound values, someone whose heart harbored genuine compassion and kindness. Few, if any, knew what he, a once-abandoned child, had truly accomplished. Most believed he had died years ago, a forgotten, impoverished man named Arthur Finch, with no family remaining. It was precisely this widespread misconception that sparked a brilliant yet ruthlessly ingenious plan in his mind, to expose the Thorne family's true character before his death, and at the same time, to discern if humanity still held any flicker of hope, any genuine goodness in its core. His plan was meticulously crafted, every detail painstakingly arranged. He hired a private team of highly skilled makeup artists and costume designers, binding them to strict vows of secrecy. They worked tirelessly to create the perfect disguise: artfully crafted wrinkles, age spots, mottled skin, carefully frayed and patched garments, and a weak, trembling gait that spoke of decades of hardship. A specially designed, miniature recording device was discreetly sewn into the lining of the old, worn clothes, ensuring that every conversation, every cruel remark, every dismissive gesture would be meticulously documented. For several months, he completely immersed himself in the role, dedicated to embodying Arthur Finch. He practiced thinning his voice, adopting a frail, trembling tone, and contorting his body to appear stooped and feeble. He even had his private doctors prescribe specific medications that mimicked real health issues, making his portrayal of infirmity even more realistic and convincing. Augustus also made a secret arrangement with attorney Davies. Davies had served as the chief legal counsel for Finch Global Investments for many years, a man of unwavering loyalty and discretion, and he implicitly trusted Augustus's radical vision. Davies meticulously prepared Augustus's will, drafting it in a manner that no one, especially not the Thornes, could possibly anticipate. This will was not merely a document of inheritance, it was designed to be Augustus's final, most profound lesson, a masterstroke of poetic justice. Augustus's ultimate goal was not just to expose the Thorne family's avarice and cruelty, but also to deliver a painful, unforgettable lesson, that character, genuine human kindness, was infinitely more valuable than any amount of wealth. And this profound lesson, he knew, would soon begin with the chilling sound of a bell tolling at the Thornes' very own door. One crisp autumn morning, Augustus, cloaked in his carefully constructed persona of Arthur Finch, stood before the colossal, wrought iron gates of the Thorne estate. His aged body trembled, a deliberate display of frailty. His hunched posture and tattered garments formed a stark, almost painful contrast to the grand opulence of the mansion that loomed before him. The weary expression on his face, meticulously applied, suggested a man who had endured a lifetime of struggle, a desolate journey to this very doorstep. In his hand, he clutched a small, ancient suitcase, its worn leather held together by sheer willpower, containing little more than a few spare, equally threadbare clothes and a collection of meticulously forged documents detailing his fabricated past. As he raised a trembling hand to knock, a young, impeccably uniformed footman appeared, his face a mask of polite indifference. Arthur, his voice deliberately thin and reedy, introduced himself. "I am Arthur Finch. A distant relative. My mother's grandfather, you see, was the brother of your great-grandmother. I heard of Uncle Augustus's passing, my father's uncle, that is, and I find myself in dire need of a place to stay." The footman, clearly discomforted by Arthur's disheveled appearance and the obvious poverty he exuded, excused himself to inform Thaddeus Thorne. A few minutes later, Thaddeus himself appeared at the grand entrance. His gleaming, polished shoes and perfectly pressed trousers created a stark, almost insulting contrast with Arthur's miserable state. "Arthur Finch?" Thaddeus questioned, his voice dripping with condescension and a thinly veiled sneer. "An email came, informing me of your existence. There was a faint note of you in the family tree, but no one ever imagined you were still alive. What exactly do you want here?" Arthur, feigning a tremulous voice, recounted his fabricated tale, how he had lived in a remote, forgotten village, how he had lost his humble home, and how, as his last resort, he had sought out the Thornes, his only remaining kin. Thaddeus rolled his eyes, a flicker of disgust passing across his face as he listened to the old man's pathetic story. "So, you've come to impose on us? This estate is not a shelter, old man. This is my home. And there is no place here for poor, aged relatives." At that precise moment, Seraphina appeared, resplendent in a shimmering silk dressing gown, her movements graceful yet imbued with a distinct air of self-importance. Upon seeing Arthur's worn clothes and disheveled state, she pursed her lips in an expression of undisguised revulsion. "Oh, good heavens, Thaddeus! Who is this? What are these rags? He'll frighten the guests." Thaddeus, still exasperated, replied, "A distant relative, I suppose. Arthur Finch. He seems to be in need of a place to stay. Seraphina scrutinized Arthur from head to toe, her eyes openly betraying her disgust. This is not a hotel, old man. Nor do I believe this estate runs a social welfare program. Perhaps you can find a place in the gardener's cottage, or better yet, you should simply leave. You'll bring nothing but shame upon us. Her words, like sharp needles, pierced the thin veil of Arthur's composure, igniting a quiet fury within Augustus. Reginald Thorne, ever the calculating opportunist, joined the chaotic scene. He arrived clutching a stack of papers, a look of profound contempt fixed on his face. Thaddeus, Seraphina, are you truly considering letting this man inside? You cannot be so irresponsible. He will tarnish our family name. We already have enough trouble with people stirring up things about old Augustus's inheritance. Now this? He should go find a retirement home for himself. We have no time to feed or care for him. The expenses of this house are already exorbitant. Reginald's words were sharp, cutting knives, each one a testament to their hardened hearts. Augustus, in his carefully crafted Arthur disguise, absorbed these cruel and dismissive words. No emotion flickered across his face, a blank canvas of feigned weariness. Yet, deep within, he felt a chilling confirmation. His plan was not merely justified, it was absolutely necessary. They hadn't changed, on the contrary, with each passing year, they had only grown more avaricious, more heartless, their souls shrinking with every indulgence. Thaddeus, finally exasperated, impatiently waved his hand. Look, Arthur. I will permit you to stay in one of the outbuildings for a single day. There's the cottage in the garden. But early tomorrow morning, you must find somewhere else to stay. Do you understand? Otherwise, I will have you forcibly removed. Arthur nodded meekly, his shoulders slumped in feigned defeat, and slowly shuffled along the ancient, worn stone path that led through the sprawling gardens. His gaze, carefully directed, settled on a small, unkempt cottage, half hidden in the shadow of the imposing mansion. Just then, an elderly woman, her back bent, was tending to some faded flowers in front of the cottage. She wore old overalls stained with garden soil, and her face was crisscrossed with deep wrinkles, but her eyes held a warm, tired light, a flicker of genuine humanity. This was Elara, the estate's long-serving gardener, a woman whose life had been spent nurturing beauty in the midst of the Thorns' barren hearts. Elara looked up and saw Arthur. Despite the weariness etched on her face, her eyes immediately softened with compassion. "Ah, you must be the new visitor," she said, her voice soft and genuinely kind, a welcome contrast to the harsh tones he had just endured. "I saw you go to Mrs. Seraphina. How kind they were, weren't they?" The subtle irony in her last sentence, delivered with a gentle sigh, caused a faint, almost imperceptible smile to touch the corner of Arthur's lips. It was the first authentic human connection he had experienced since beginning his elaborate charade. Elara sighed, her gaze softening as she took in Arthur's miserable state. "Won't you come inside? It's cold out. I could make you some tea. Perhaps even some hot soup. I made a little extra today." Arthur looked at Elara with a profound sense of surprise. After all these years, after a lifetime of calculated exchanges and self-serving interactions, this was the first time he had been offered a kindness with no strings attached, no expectation of return. Elara's cottage, by contrast to the mansion's ostentation, was small and humble, almost forgotten. Yet, inside, it was filled with the comforting aroma of a warm wood stove and an undeniable sense of cleanliness and simple order. Elara offered him a plain wooden chair and immediately turned to the pot simmering on the stove. "The soup is just a simple bean and vegetable broth," she said, her voice gentle. "But it will warm you." As Arthur ate the simple, nourishing soup, he engaged in quiet conversation with Elara. She spoke freely of her own hardships, how she had lost her husband years ago, how her only son worked far away, and how she struggled to make ends meet on the meager wage she received from the estate. Despite her aged body, she continued to work tirelessly every day, finding solace and purpose in the earth. "It's hard to trust people, isn't it?" Elara murmured, a wistful note in her voice. "But sometimes, a hand of kindness reaches out from the most unexpected place." Augustus listened to her words, a lump forming in his throat. Without knowing his true identity, Elara was, in her simple wisdom, imparting the most significant lesson of his life, validating the very purpose of his elaborate test. The following days transformed Arthur's stay into more than just a test. It became a grueling struggle for survival, a painful endurance of calculated cruelty. Thaddeus forced him to perform arduous labor in the garden, sneering, "If you're eating our food, you'll be useful." Arthur, his frail body protesting, struggled to dig the hardened earth, to lift heavy pots, while Thaddeus watched from a distance, a mocking smirk on his face. Seraphina frequently descended upon the kitchen, deliberately preventing Arthur from getting enough food, muttering, "You have no right to waste family resources, old man." Reginald, in particular, seized every opportunity to humiliate Arthur, branding him a parasite and a disgrace. One day, Reginald imperiously demanded Arthur go to town to buy him cheap cigarettes, tossing him only a few paltry coins as if he were a beggar. Arthur endured these endless humiliations with remarkable patience, a quiet, almost imperceptible smile hidden deep within him, knowing that every facet of their despicable characters was being meticulously recorded, every cruel word a damning piece of evidence. Yet, in the midst of these hellish days, Elara's humble cottage remained a sanctuary, a small beacon of warmth and human decency. Every day, Elara continued to share her meager lunch with Arthur, a simple act of profound generosity. She even knitted him a coarse wool cardigan, explaining, "It gets cold at night," a gesture that touched Augustus more deeply than any material gift ever could. When Arthur feigned illness, Elara spent entire nights at his bedside, tending to him, preparing herbal teas, and recounting simple, heartwarming stories from her own life. Elara listened intently to Arthur's fabricated tales of woe, always showing genuine, heartfelt interest. She spoke of her own childhood, of simple but profoundly happy days, days filled with love and laughter rather than money and status. "The most important thing in life isn't what you possess, but the goodness in your heart," Elara had once said, her voice soft but firm. "Money comes and goes, but a good heart shines forever." These words, spoken by a woman who had little to give but her compassion, seemed to instantly soothe years of Augustus's deep-seated pain. As Augustus meticulously observed Elara's unwavering, selfless kindness, his resolve hardened, his decision becoming absolutely definitive. The Thorne family had, without a doubt, confirmed his worst fears. They were utterly enslaved by the superficial allure of money, social status, and outward appearances, having long ago sacrificed their very humanity on the altar of greed. But Elara, in this dark world of avarice, shone like a rare, radiant light. She possessed a true, immeasurable wealth, compassion, empathy, and an innate sense of humanity. Augustus's will, meticulously drafted and now ready to be revealed, was no longer merely a document of inheritance. It had transformed into a symbol of righteous judgment and a deserved reward. The grueling test had concluded, and Augustus knew, with a quiet certainty, that the time for the ultimate revelation had finally arrived. The grand salon of the Thorne estate, on the day Attorney Davies was scheduled to read the will, was filled with a taut, suffocating silence. Thaddeus, Seraphina, and Reginald fidgeted impatiently in their plush armchairs, their bodies radiating a coiled tension. Their faces were contorted with an almost grotesque, avaricious expectation, their eyes already picturing the millions they envisioned and the new, lofty titles they believed were rightfully theirs. Arthur Finch, as always, sat hunched in a distant corner, seemingly an insignificant fixture of the room, still clad in his ancient, frayed garments. No one paid him any mind. His presence, to them, was as inconsequential as a fly buzzing in the opulent space. Thaddeus, unable to contain his impatience any longer, turned to Attorney Davies, his voice a low growl. "Mr. Davies, can we please conclude this comedy? We are running late." Seraphina, her voice laced with disdain, added, "Yes, and one hopes our inheritance isn't as repugnant as this old man's presence," casting a withering glance of disgust at Arthur. Reginald, a sneering smirk playing on his lips, murmured, "Perhaps they've left him a few pennies, enough to get himself into a proper old folks' home." Attorney Davies, a master of timing, calmly placed a thick, leather-bound file on the table, its weight seeming to emphasize the gravity of the moment. Behind his spectacles, his eyes held the quiet knowledge of the impending storm about to break. "Members of the esteemed Thorne family," he began, his voice surprisingly clear and resonant, reaching every corner of the vast salon. "Today, we are here to read the last will and testament of the late Augustus Finch." Every breath seemed to catch in the room. Davies first read out clauses that outlined a temporary, conditional bequest of the mansion and certain company shares to the Thorne family, but specified it was only for a period of 1 year. Thaddeus's face flushed crimson with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "What? Temporary? Nonsense. This mansion has always been ours," he bellowed, his voice cracking with indignation. Davies continued, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Actually, the true owner of the mansion and all of Finch Global Investments holdings will be revealed in the final section of the will. However, before that, the late Mr. Augustus Finch had a very specific request. He wished, in his final days, to test the true character of his family. This, he stated, was the last and most important project of his life." A ripple of murmurs spread through the salon. Thaddeus, his face contorted in disbelief, roared, "What utter nonsense! Who are you talking about? My uncle would never do such a thing. It's utterly preposterous." At that precise moment, Arthur Finch, who had been sitting so meekly, slowly, deliberately, began to rise from his seat. He unbuttoned his old, frayed jacket, the worn fabric rustling softly. Beneath it, a layer of disguise seemed to peel away, revealing not a finer suit, but a more dignified, if still modest, inner garment. The carefully applied wrinkles and age spots on his face, once so convincing, now appeared to melt away, as if a mask was being shed. His previously tremulous, hobbling gait slowly transformed, replaced by a straight, confident, almost regal posture. The reedy, thin voice he had adopted for months now deepened, gaining a powerful, authoritative resonance that filled the room. "You are quite right, Thaddeus. Such a thing would never have been expected of me. But as you can plainly see, I did it." Thaddeus, Seraphina, and Reginald's faces instantly drained of all color, turning a ghastly white. Their eyes widened in a collective gasp of utter astonishment, their mouths agape, unable to form a single coherent word. For them, this was not merely shocking, it was like encountering a ghost, a specter risen from the grave. You, Arthur?" Seraphina stammered, her voice a mere whisper, laced with profound disbelief. This is impossible." Augustus slowly walked towards them, each deliberate step deepening the oppressive silence that had fallen over the salon. His eyes, burning with years of accumulated anger towards them, also held a faint, almost triumphant mockery at their current predicament. "I am not Arthur Finch," Augustus declared, his voice resonating with an undeniable authority. "I am Augustus Finch. The owner of this will, your late uncle, Augustus Finch." Davies, relishing the dramatic revelation, stepped forward slightly. "Indeed," he added, his voice firm. "Mr. Augustus Finch, for the past several months, has been living among you, taking refuge as Arthur Finch. He was here to observe and test the true character of the Thorne family, to see if they had changed since the treatment he endured as a child." A guttural cry escaped Thaddeus's throat. This must be a joke." "No. You weren't dead," he shrieked, his voice filled with a desperate, frantic denial. Augustus smiled calmly, a chilling, knowing smile. "My death, Thaddeus, was greatly exaggerated. At least for me. For you, however, yes, you must be feeling quite dead inside right now. He reached into his pocket and slowly, deliberately, pulled out the small, hidden recording device, its metallic gleam catching the light. This device, you see, has recorded every one of your conversations, every single one of your humiliations. Disgrace, parasite, burden, it's all here. The contempt you've harbored since my childhood has not changed. In fact, it has only grown worse. Serafina, her face contorted in a mask of fury and fear, shrieked, "No. This is a trick. A fraud." Reginald, his eyes blazing with rage, sprang to his feet. "You can't do this. This is unfair. Aren't we your relatives?" Augustus's eyes darkened, his composure unwavering. "Relatives? You are the ones who cast me out as a child. You treated me worse than you would treat a stray dog. And now, in my fabricated destitution, you did the very same thing. You are soulless creatures who value nothing but money. And this mansion, this company, this fortune, it will never, ever be yours." Attorney Davies, seizing the moment, opened his file and turned to the final, pivotal paragraph. His voice, clear and unwavering, cut through the tension. The final unbinding clause of the last will and testament of the late Mr. Augustus Finch states, "I hereby bequeath my entire estate and all my fortune to the person who, in my final months, showed me unconditional compassion and humanity, the person who helped me see the true light of character in this world. This person is Alara, the gardener of the Thorn estate." An absolute, deafening silence descended upon the salon, a stillness so profound it felt as if time itself had stopped. Thaddeus's jaw dropped, his mouth hanging open in utter shock. Serafina was frozen in a state of catatonic disbelief, her eyes wide, staring blankly ahead. Reginald, as if a dagger had been plunged directly into his heart, slowly sank to his knees, the weight of the revelation crushing him. Alara's name, echoing in the quiet room, had exploded like a bomb, shattering their world into a million pieces. The narrator knew, in that chilling moment, the profound shock, the bitter sense of betrayal, and the raw, pure horror that enveloped the room. Augustus's mask had finally fallen, his true identity exposed, and this, irrevocably, spelled the end of the Thorn family as they knew it. The months that followed Attorney Davies's pronouncement of Alara's name saw the Thorn salon, once a vibrant theater of their ambition, instantly frozen in a tableau of despair. The color had drained from Thaddeus, Serafina, and Reginald's faces, leaving them ashen, resembling mummies embalmed in their own misery. This was not merely the loss of an inheritance, it was the instantaneous annihilation of their lives, their reputations, and every single dream they had ever harbored for the future. Thaddeus, his voice a hoarse croak, finally found his words, but they were filled with nothing but desperate denial. This is impossible. A gardener? I cannot believe this. This is a lie. This is a trick." Serafina, her hand clasped over her mouth, began to sob uncontrollably, her glamorous facade utterly shattered. "It's all over. Everything is over. What will we do?" Reginald, for once, remained silent, simply clutching his head with trembling hands, his eyes fixed on some distant, empty point. As the estate manager, he had for years reveled in his position of power and the arrogant life it afforded him. Now, he watched in abject horror as that very life evaporated before his eyes, leaving him with nothing but a bitter void. Augustus, his posture straight and his voice calm and authoritative, surveyed the scene with a quiet sense of triumph and justice. "This is not a lie, Thaddeus. This is the most just and honest decision of my life," he declared, his gaze unwavering. "When I came to your door, you saw me as a burden, a parasite. You humiliated me, scorned me, and even tried to cast me out of your home. But Alara, despite her own struggles, showed me an unconditional warmth, a profound humanity. She did what none of you were capable of, she treated a human being like a human being." Attorney Davies, his expression stern, continued to speak, the legal terms now ringing with the force of a final judgment. According to the will, all rights of the Thorne family to this estate are immediately null and void. All shares of Finch Global Investments, all bank accounts, the mansion itself, and all associated land and properties will be transferred to Ms. Alara. Furthermore, Thaddeus Thorne and Seraphina Thorne's positions within the company and all income derived from affiliated companies are immediately terminated. Reginald Thorne's position as estate manager and all other family-related appointments have also been revoked. These words completely shattered Thaddeus and Seraphina. Thaddeus, his face a mask of frantic despair, cried out, "What? Our positions? But those are our only sources of income. All our wealth was tied to the company." Davies, his voice devoid of emotion, replied coldly, "Yes, Mr. Thorne. All these assets were under the control of Mr. Augustus Finch. And now, control has been fully transferred to Ms. Alara. As for you, you are merely granted a period of 24 hours to collect your personal belongings and vacate the estate." Thaddeus, his eyes blazing with impotent fury, turned on Augustus. "You are a monster. You have ruined us. Your own family." Augustus offered a faint, sardonic smile. "A monster? I know full well what I became when you abandoned me all those years ago. You are superficial people, empty inside, who value only appearance and money. The only thing I have given you is the justice you so richly deserve." Just then, the door to the salon opened, and Alara stepped inside. She had just returned from her gardening, her hands still smudged with earth, her face tired but radiating a quiet, inner peace. She immediately sensed the thick, suffocating tension in the room. Her brow furrowed in mild confusion as everyone turned to stare at her. "Is there a problem, sir?" she asked, her voice soft and respectful, still addressing Augustus as the humble Arthur. Augustus walked towards Alara, a profound, genuine smile gracing his lips, a smile that replaced the years of pain and loneliness he had carried. He gently took Alara's hand, his touch firm and warm. "Alara," he said, his voice soft yet resonating clearly throughout the stunned room. "I am here to thank you. The kindness you showed me proved that there is still true compassion in this world. You, my dear Alara, have been a beacon of light for me." Alara, her brow furrowed in utter bewilderment, stammered, "What do you mean, sir?" I simply did what I could." Davies then turned to Alara, his voice announcing a truth that defied all logic. "Ms. Alara, you are now one of the wealthiest women in the world. This mansion, all shares of Finch Global Investments, and the entire fortune of the late Mr. Augustus Finch, legally belong to you." Alara's eyes widened, her hands began to tremble uncontrollably, and the color drained from her face. "What? Me? This must be a joke. I am just a gardener." Augustus placed his hands gently on Alara's shoulders, his gaze steady and filled with admiration. "No, Alara. You are far more than just a gardener. You are the person who proved that character is worth more than any amount of wealth. This fortune, this legacy, is fitting for a person like you. You are the only one who truly deserves it." Alara, still reeling from the shock, found words lodged in her throat. Her eyes welled up with tears, but these were tears of overwhelming joy and disbelief. She had never encountered anything like this in her entire life. She had lived in poverty, always working for others, always struggling. Now, she stood on the threshold of a life she could never have even dared to dream of. Thaddeus, Seraphina, and Reginald watched Alara's transformation, their own fall from grace intensified by the sight of the very woman they had despised rising to such unimaginable heights. They had lost everything they possessed, and it had all fallen into the hands of a woman they had scorned and humiliated. This was not merely the loss of a fortune, it was the complete annihilation of their pride and their very existence. The narrator felt, in that poignant moment, the cold wind of justice sweeping through the room and the cruel irony of fate. The masks had fallen, and each character had found their rightful, if painful, place. Months passed swiftly. The Thorne estate, once a symbol of cold, ostentatious grandeur, had shed its former, dull magnificence and was now infused with a vibrant, new energy. Elara, slowly but surely, emerged from the initial shock of her inheritance. At first, she had been overwhelmed, unsure of what to do with such immense responsibility and wealth. However, a letter Augustus had meticulously prepared for her, delivered posthumously by Attorney Davies, served as her guiding light. In the letter, Augustus had offered not just advice on managing the fortune and investments, but a deeper philosophy on philanthropy and the true purpose of wealth. Elara, embracing his vision, used a substantial portion of the inheritance to establish a foundation dedicated to helping the elderly who faced hardships, much like her own past, and to supporting young people who aspired to study horticulture and agriculture. She transformed vast tracts of the estate's land into a sprawling organic community garden, providing fresh, healthy food to those in need in the surrounding area. For herself, she kept only a modest portion, choosing to continue her life with the same simplicity and humility that had always defined her. She still tended to the gardens, but now it was not out of necessity, but from a profound passion and love for the earth. The lines on her face had deepened with age, but her eyes, brimming with kindness and purpose, shone brighter than ever before. Augustus Finch, his elaborate test completed, departed from life peacefully, his soul finally at rest. Just a few weeks after transferring his immense fortune to Elara, he drifted into a serene sleep in his own small, unassuming home, a man who had finally found his inner peace. He had shed the burden he had carried for decades, delivering justice and providing immeasurable help to one who truly deserved it. He had imparted his final, most profound life lesson and, in doing so, had found his own ultimate solace. For him, the true value lay not in the accumulation of wealth itself, but in ensuring it passed into the right hands, a legacy based on character, not on the mere ties of blood. Thaddeus and Seraphina Thorne, stripped of their former glory, were left with nothing but the dusty remnants of their former opulence. They found themselves hopelessly mired in debt, their reputations utterly annihilated. Their once fawning social circle had swiftly ostracized them, and their former friends vanished like ghosts. Thaddeus, in a desperate attempt to regain some semblance of income, tried to work as a waiter, but his ineptitude and ingrained arrogance quickly led to his dismissal. Seraphina attempted to work as a sales clerk in a second-hand clothing store, but she too quickly gave up, unable to cope with the reality of her diminished circumstances. Both were utterly incapable of dealing with the sudden erasure of their luxurious lives, and they began to live in squalor, constantly blaming each other for their ruin. Reginald Thorne faced the greatest challenge in finding employment. His supposed management skills had only shown when supported by an existing empire. He now learned, with bitter clarity, that he was utterly nothing on his own. His eyes, once gleaming with smug arrogance, were now filled with a hollow, profound regret. This story serves as a striking lesson, a stark reminder of what truly matters in life. Character, in its truest form, is revealed best in the darkest of times. The masks people wear can easily fall, but the true intentions of their hearts can never be hidden. The Thorne family, blinded by the intoxicating power of money and social status, had lost their humanity. They had viewed wealth as an inherent right, yet they lacked the compassion and humility required to truly earn or appreciate it. Elara, on the other hand, possessed nothing but a vast, generous heart, and it was she who ultimately embodied true wealth. Kindness, in the end, always finds its reward, sometimes unexpectedly, sometimes in a way that surpasses all imagination. Augustus Finch's story reminds us that how we treat others, the choices we make, inevitably shape our future destiny. For life, in its essence, is a test, and the greatest rewards are reserved for those who, despite the most challenging trials, manage to keep the light in their hearts shining bright. Did this story remind you of the harsh yet just realities of life? Were you moved by Augustus Finch's ingenious plan and Elara's unwavering kindness? On our channel, you can find many more inspiring and thought-provoking stories just like this one. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming narratives. In your opinion, did Thaddeus, Serafina, and Reginald learn any lessons from their dramatic downfall? Or do you think their characters were too corrupted to ever truly change? Also, if you were in Alara's place, what would you do with such a colossal inheritance? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. We read every single one of your comments and love to engage in discussion. See you in the next video.